When I first heard of Control, I knew I wanted to play it. Everyone I knew that had played it said they had a blast, and I really wanted to be a part of that. I tried to play it several times, but I kept losing interest because while the gameplay is decent, the real meat of the game is the story. In the past, when I would boot it up, I was looking more for an action type game without a ton of focus on story, and in Control, you really need to pay attention to the smallest details to get the most out of the game. I would skip through the notes and files that have most of the lore, they're optional, and I was missing out big time. From the moment you start the game, you're bombarded with a slew of metaphors and symbolism that recur all throughout the game and become more clear as you progress, so you really need to pay attention from the get-go. The story starts out fairly basic, but quickly ramps up into something much more complex and deep. You play as Jessie, a young woman on the search for her brother Dylan, who went missing following a paranormal event in their hometown of Ordinary, Wisconsin. Ironic name, I know. A government agency caught wind of the event and stormed the town. They abducted Dylan to study him and the effects the event had on him. They tried to take Jessie, but she barely evaded their grasp and has spent years tirelessly searching for her brother. Her search finally led her to the headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Control, which is where the game properly starts. You're shown a dramatic and almost sinister portrait of a janitor who seems to be simply doing his job, while Jessie explains a metaphor about a world behind a poster on the wall. Cut to a shot of the janitor mopping the floor, eerily backlit. Then you're thrust headfirst into a seemingly empty government building with alerts of a lockdown on every screen you see. After about 45 seconds of gameplay, you round a corner and are faced with the janitor posed exactly like his portrait. He's obviously important, but you don't know why yet. And I usually expect games to ease you into the story passively, but they really smack you in the face with it here. Turns out, the janitor isn't sinister at all, and is a kind, if not spacey, man named Ati, who shows up periodically throughout the story. Soon after, you learn that the building you're in is internally referred to as the oldest house, and its walls shift and change shape seemingly randomly. You're shown a scene of an important-looking man shot in the head with a strange-looking gun. You experience all of this in the first few minutes of the game, and if you miss any of it, you're going to be pretty confused later on, which you would have been already even if you paid attention. Fast forward a bit, and you're introduced to a pivotal concept of the game. Throughout time, there exist weapons imbued with mystical powers. These weapons are colloquially referred to as Objects of Power, or OOPs. Some of these weapons include Thor's hammer Mjolnir and the legendary Excalibur. The strange gun we saw earlier is one of these objects of power, called the service weapon, which can transform itself to fit the needs of the wielder. Through a little bit of murder, you become attuned to this weapon after it judges you worthy through a trial in a realm called the Astral Plane. This gun becomes your primary means of protecting yourself in the oldest house. The service weapon can assume 5 different forms, each resembling an archetype of your usual FPS weapons. You're able to improve each form with mods that change its attributes, like increased damage or quicker reload time. Speaking of reloading, the weapon doesn't have ammo in the typical sense. It operates on a resource meter which refills over time after a delay once you stop firing. Each weapon form uses a different amount of this resource, so you're encouraged to use your other abilities while it reloads. I'm getting ahead of myself there, though. The default configuration for the service weapon is called Grip. For all intents and purposes, this is a pistol. It seems a bit weak at first, but it's surprisingly versatile, especially in the early hours of the game. It's not a terrible weapon, but once I unlocked the other weapon forms, I pretty much never used it again. It's like when you replace your toothbrush with a nice new electric one. The old one got the job done, but the new one is so much better. Pretty soon, you're able to unlock Spin, the electric toothbrush of the service weapon. This transformation is a submachine gun cut and dry. You've got just about enough ammo to take down maybe 2 enemies before needing to reload. The bullet spread is a little dramatic, so if you like to spray and pray like I do, it's best at mid-close range. If Spin is the electric toothbrush, Shatter is the mouthwash. It's a shotgun, so naturally it's great at close range, and it's got quite a kick to it. If you increase its damage with some mods, this thing can take out lower level enemies in one hit. Next up is Charge, the equivalent of not brushing your teeth for a week and having an uncomfortably close whispered conversation with someone. This is a rocket launcher. It deals an initial explosion once it lands, then explodes a second time a second or so later. I didn't use this weapon much, but when I did, I had a ton of fun with it. It's perfect for mowing down groups of weaker enemies. Now for my favorite, Pierce. This is like punching someone's teeth out so they never have to worry about dental care again. It's most similar to a rifle. This thing deals a ton of DPS, and like the name suggests, it pierces through everything. It ignores enemy armor, it can shoot clean through multiple enemies, and even shoots through the environment itself. If your enemies are grouped up, which happens quite a bit, you can line up a single shot and take them all out at once. The trade-off for this is you only get 2 shots before it needs to reload, but if you can land your shots, you'll tear through enemies, and if you use your abilities during the reload, you'll pretty much never have to worry about your ammo. The service weapon isn't the only object of power you interact with. As the game ramps up, you gain access to more interesting abilities. This gun I have is awesome, and I'm about to get a whole new weapon. Another object of power that stands shoulder to shoulder with Excalibur. Oh man, I'm excited. Here it comes. The next legendary weapon is a floppy disk. A floppy disk? Color me unimpressed. Maybe this game isn't the wild ride I was promised. Just kidding. The moment you enter the floppy disk room, you're pelted with explosive canisters that can kill you in a heartbeat. After you carefully traverse your way over to the weapon, you attune to it through a similar trial to the one you faced to receive the service weapon. Congratulations! You just earned your first ability. It's called Launch. You use telekinesis to throw pretty much any object nearby at your enemies. It completely destroys enemy shields, so you'll use it pretty often. You can upgrade this and other abilities through a skill tree similar to the one seen in Dishonored. If you fully upgrade this ability, you can completely eliminate enemies without breaking a sweat. Or maybe you break a sweat, I don't know your life. Sometimes the objects you pull get stuck on the environment, but it's so rare that it's hardly an issue. There are a few more objects of power to interact with to deck yourself out with the latest in supernatural technology. The next one, and in my opinion, the worst one, is the Hotline. It's a red rotary phone that you can use to contact extra-dimensional entities. In our reality, that means you gain access to some optional audio files that help pad out the lore. Honestly, I'm really not sure why Drake felt the need to write a song about this thing. Slightly more useful, but still a bit underwhelming, is the Evade maneuver. You get this ability by touching a merry-go-round horse. I wish it was that easy in real life. Press a button and power slide across the floor. That's about it. It's useful, but it's the equivalent of getting socks for Christmas as a kid. You need socks, but you are kinda hoping for something more exciting. It's almost impossible to be hit while you're dashing, so it's really good for repositioning and retreating to cover. It can feel a little clunky sometimes. For a dash move, you travel a bit slower than you would expect, but you get used to it. My favorite object of power contains my least favorite ability. In order to get the shield ability, you need to complete an obstacle course and attune to a safe. Get it? Safe? Shield? Safety? Wow, jokes are so much funnier when you have to explain them. The ability looks really cool, but I just didn't use it much. It's most useful to give yourself a bit of cover, but there aren't really many situations where there isn't natural cover from the environment. You can't use any offensive abilities while you're using it, but in a situation where you need to use the shield, you probably won't want to be attacking. I most often used it to dash into health pickups and then back into safety. All in all, The ability I had the most issues with is Levitate. You attune to a TV and gain the ability to float. Not sure what the connection there is, but I'll just assume there is one. When you use Levitate, you levitate off the ground. Shocker. It's great for repositioning, but I never got used to the way it controls. It activates when you hold down the space bar, which I find myself doing all the time by accident during the heat of battle. I'll be shooting a bad guy, then just fly into the sky, because why not? There's also not a really intuitive way to control your height. You can float upwards, but once you let go of the spacebar, that's as high as you go. Once you're in the air, you can either wait for the ability to run out and float slowly towards the ground, or press spacebar again to cancel the ability to drop into a free fall. You'll have to press it again on the way down in order to start a slow fall. For some reason, I always expect it to go straight into a slow fall, so I fell into a pit more than 10 times. It's way too easy to get stuck on the environment because of this. I'll try to pull off a cool flying snipe with Pierce, then just smack into a wall and throw off my aim. Now for my favorite ability, Seize. Attune to an X-ray light box and gain mind control ability. Still not sure how they're related, but I'm not going to complain. In my opinion, Seize has the most utility of all the abilities. Use spooky Jedi mind tricks and your enemies will fight for you instead of against you. This is obviously incredibly useful. If you upgrade it fully, you can take control of pretty much every enemy. It has a cast time, during which you're vulnerable to attack, but you can mostly mitigate the danger by dashing. In order to seize an enemy, you have to lower their health to the tiniest sliver. You basically have to put in the work of killing the enemy completely, but stopping just short of it, so it doesn't feel cheap. In the middle of battle, controlling your fire enough to prevent killing an enemy can be tough. Seizing powerful enemies takes longer, but they give you more DPS. If you go after weaker enemies, it takes much less time and you can gain the advantage of numbers. My go-to technique is to seize a few enemies, then go hide while my minions fight for me. Some might call it cowardly, I call it delegating. So that's that as far as gameplay goes. In my opinion, the real draw is in the optional lore. Throughout the Oldest House, you'll find notes, videos, and audio files that are the seasoning on top of the chicken that is the gameplay. The Bureau isn't dedicated only to objects of power. Through these optional items that are sprinkled around the world, you learn of AWEs and AIs, Altered World Events and Altered Items respectively. An Altered World Event is an unnatural event spurred by extra-dimensional influences manifesting in our reality. An Altered Item is the result of an Altered World event interacting with an everyday item, giving it odd properties. These things are awesome. They take the form of strange concepts, puzzles, and even references to other games, movies, and even literature. For example, one of the altered items you find in the Panopticon is a Tunnel of Love swan boat. It isn't explicitly stated anywhere, but I believe this is a reference to the Dresden Files short story Love Hurts. In the story, a vampire enchantress charms the seatbelts of a swan boat, causing the writers to fall madly in love. It goes awry and causes the victims of the spell to, in softer terms, purposefully pass away. An enchanted swan boat seems like the perfect subject of study for the Bureau. One of the more obvious references is the crowbar altered item, which can be easily connected to the famous tool wielded by Gordon Freeman in the Half-Life series. And there's this silly stoplight item as well. In order to cleanse this stoplight, you quite literally have to play red light, green light. My favorite, though, is the report titled Ordinary AWE Stage 1.B. The AWE in Ordinary Wisconsin is the catalyst for the events of the game. Jessie and her brother Dylan discover a slide projector whose slides project doorways into other dimensions. In the report, one of the interdimensional travels is recounted by Jessie. Part of the file reads, "The second slide we called the meadow, but it was really just an empty lot with a bunch of weeds. There was a shack and a phone line. It smelled like flowers there. It was powerful, intoxicating. We had crazy dreams there. It must have been because of the smell. I didn't like it, didn't like losing control. In the dreams, everything was melting, and then when we'd come out, everything had melted around the projector." To me, this is strongly reminiscent of the poppy field scene in The Wizard of Oz. There are some differences, but the core ideas are all there. Some dialogue from the scene is as follows. "Now, it is well known that when there are many of these flowers together, their odor is so powerful that anyone who breathes it falls asleep. And if the sleeper is not carried away from the scent of the flowers, he sleeps on and on forever. But Dorothy did not know this, nor could she get away from the bright red flowers that were everywhere about, so presently her eyes grew heavy, and she felt she must sit down to rest and to sleep. 'If we leave her here, she will die,' said the lion. 'The smell of the flowers is killing us all.'" In my eyes, the similarities here are way too close to ignore. My one big problem with this game, and it's a doozy, is the pacing. The four things I just listed are my favorite parts of the game, and most of that comes from my own perception and assumptions. I played the game for over 15 hours, and those are the few positive things that stood out to me. In this game, the negatives bring it way down. Compared to other games, the pacing and control is comparable to being stuck behind an old woman going 15 below the speed limit and you're late for work. For me, the gameplay itself is not the main attraction. There isn't much variance, it all kind of feels the same. Throughout most of the game, I felt like I was repeating myself. Run to the objective, shoot a man, throw a rock. Shoot a man, throw a rock, shoot a man. Maybe mind control an enemy, throw a rock, shoot a man. Sure, the abilities feel nice to use and make you feel like a superhero during combat, but if I want to feel like a superhero and use cool abilities, I'll just play Dishonored. In that game, you can play stealthy or barge right into combat or anything in between. I understand that Control isn't supposed to be that kind of game, but again, the gameplay is not what draws me to the game. The lore is incredible, but for one awesome report on a magic lawn flamingo, there are 10 that don't really contain anything of interest. Including documents like this person's ID is great for populating the world with things that you would actually find in the situation, but when the meaningful lore is being drip-fed to you over the course of hours, it just feels disappointing when you pick up a folder and it's just a portrait of the character you've been staring at for the entire game. The game also has a serious problem with making you wait for things. The loading screens take ages, which in itself is forgivable. Not all loading screens can be short, but you have to wait the entire length of it every time you die. Sure, if I were better at video games, I would die less, but that doesn't change the fact that I probably spent at least an hour total staring at these screens. And it's not just that. There are several moments during gameplay when you just have to sit and wait. A ton of lore is found in cassette tapes. The thing is, you have to stay in the vicinity of the cassette player in order to hear the whole thing. Yes, you can listen to them from inside the inventory, but you still have to sit there staring at your inventory while you could be playing the game. In the penultimate act of the game, you receive a tape player from Ati, the janitor from earlier. Would it really be too much to ask to get the tape deck early so you can listen on the go? One of these cassettes is a researcher trying to communicate with a rubber duck altered item. This could have been a really cool moment where you see the procedure of studying these objects and how they react. But nothing happens. Nothing happens for a whole minute and then the tape ends. Yeah, it's cool to learn about the ways the Bureau tests altered objects, but it would be so much more interesting for the duck to maybe quack once when the researcher addresses it directly. In the case files for the rubber duck, it's mentioned that the duck can quack if it forms a bond with someone. It might go against the lore a tiny bit for the duck to quack without a meaningful bond, but I'm 100% sure that suspension of disbelief would not be broken by a magical duck quacking once. Since there are audio files that contain important information, I felt compelled to listen to the whole thing. For nothing. I get it, it's a nice bit of world building. This audio shows that repeated testing can be monotonous and fruitless for the researcher, but I'm not playing a game about supernatural forces to empathize with boring office work. There's also this objective where you need to contain letters that zip around the room. Each letter zooms to a set location in a set order, so to complete the mission, you stand in a single spot and wait for the letter to stop in front of you. And you have to do this 3 times. The very worst offender to me, though, is this moment where you press a button to call a cable car across this huge trench. There's supposed to be an epic battle while you wait for the car to reach you, but after the cable car arrived at my location, I fell into the ravine and died. I respawned at the last checkpoint and expected to redo the battle. I was a little frustrated by this, but the combat never feels unfair or unfun, just repetitive. But since I had already completed the battle, the fight didn't restart. Cool, I thought. I don't need to hide in a corner and seize enemies to do the work for me. Except the cable car reset to its original position all the way across the trench. The cable car takes around 1:30 to make the trip one way. So I just sat there watching this thing inch its way over to me, then another 1.5 minutes while I rode it back across the trench. Again, this was caused entirely by my own stupidity, but my mistake was rewarded with 3 whole minutes of absolutely no gameplay. The lore and the story in this game are excellent. There are some moments that stand out among all of the great games I've ever played. The ashtray maze is probably one of my favorite sequences in any game. There's also this dream sequence with a silly 80s-esque music video starring one of the head researchers, who exudes a relaxed but stern disposition during the majority of the game, so seeing him in this environment is hilarious and breaks the tension in an otherwise bizarre and uncomfortable section of the game. Despite these fantastic moments, I don't see myself replaying this game for quite a while, and it's because of these annoyances. I'm probably not going to become a pro gamer anytime soon, so I'm bound to make more mistakes like the cable car incident and get hugely frustrated. I'm really sad to say that when the game ended, I was relieved to be done with it. I'll leave you with a Snapchat that I sent a friend once I finally got to the end of the game, followed by my reaction after I read the message, "Your work is not done," after the credits rolled. Beware, it's a bit loud. See you next time.
Oh my god, it's real this time. Oh, it's over. Oh my god, I have scrotum off. And heli salmonella.